Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly Penguins chat here. Andrew Destin checking in with you alongside Matt Vensel. We're recording this after Monday's practice. I'm stationed here in Nashville. Matt, of course, back in Pittsburgh after spending the last week covering the team while I was out. Before we get into the podcast, though, I want to remind you that we are brought to you by Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. Again, that's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Well, Matt, you, of course, have been with the team this past week, covering them 3 games, dropped 2 of them, secured the one to salvage that stretch over the Thanksgiving time. But you see the banner underneath me, the Penguins power play. That's certainly something that's been a big topic of the conversation. I'm sure we'll get into discussing the games at large and getting into some other big themes, but the power play, certainly something that's been a struggle here. I'll frame it to you just as it is below. What's been the problem with this power play for the Penguins here of late?
Well, when you went to California for Thanksgiving a week ago or whatever it was, did you think that the power play would somehow get even worse while you were gone?
I didn't think that was
Because they
possible.
did. They did, yeah. I mean, I think it was it's just been trending downward steadily really over the last probably dozen or so games. And then that game against the Rangers, the 1-0 loss on Wednesday to go 0 for 5. Again, 1-0 loss, like one goal makes the difference on the power play, and they weren't able to break through. And it kind of seemed to be the breaking point for Mike Sullivan. We saw him do, I think, something we kind of threw out there as a possibility in the past, that maybe he does the little trick where he splits up the top players into 2 units. That's more of like a mental reset than it is like an actual solution to tactical problems. Lasted 1 game in Buffalo. Reunited those guys Saturday against, who the heck did they play? Toronto. Didn't make a difference. So, after practice today, Monday in Cranberry, it was still kind of the same 5 guys you would expect, with Brian Rust being back in the mix, and they're going to try to figure it out. I mean, we can go a lot of different ways about what they could do for potential solutions, but I think the big thing right now is just it's clear it's a fragile group when it comes to the power play. And I think in some cases, particularly with a guy like Malkin, you see it bleed into his 5-on-5 game as well. If he's not getting those points and he's kind of struggling on the power play, it starts to affect 5-on-5 play as well. So I think that's why Sullivan stepped in a few days ago and was like, all right, let's try to just put these guys up as a mental reset. Now that that's done, how about we talk about some potential solutions if those things exist right now.
Right. When you mention potential solutions, I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But fragility, excuse me, that's a term that you bring up there when describing this group. The first place that my mind goes to is there a solution there that exists on the roster? I mean, we've talked about extensively of the depth of this group at large, the whole roster in general. But when you look at it, the way the roster is constructed, is this an issue that's something that is going to persist for 82 games? I mean, 20 is certainly still a small sample size, but there has to be a little bit of a fear that this is who they are to some degree, right? Or is that an overreaction?
No, I mean, I mean, are they going to be an elite unit? I don't know. I think it's fair to wonder at this point if that's going to happen. In terms of a fix in the roster, I don't think there's like one guy they can put on that unit and it's suddenly going to change everything. I mean, I think, as crazy as that sounds, given that you have probably 4 Hall of Famers on this team, plus a 40-goal scorer in Jake Gensel, plus a 400-goal scorer in Jeff Carter, plus, Riley Smith and everything he's done, Raquel. I mean, some really talented players, and they're still missing certain elements of what would be a really good power play. I mean, I think we can start at the point. I think a lot of people, or maybe not a lot of people, maybe some people kind of look at it and say, okay, well, they brought in this Carlson guy and it's not working. Maybe they need to go back to Letang. I don't think the point man has really mattered. I think their problems are elsewhere on that unit. I mean, I guess maybe you can make a case for the familiarity factor with Chris Letang. If those 2 guys are kind of interchangeable, maybe that's the word that they go. Monday's practice, it was still Carlson there. But I think if you look at where the rest of the guys are deployed, I mean, I think that's fair to question, if they should make more drastic changes, and also like what, is there limits to what they can do. I mean, you look at Sidney Crosby, one of the top 5, 6, 7 players in NHL history, and they have him parked down off that right post where we've seen him time and time and time again over the years. And while he's really good at some tips and making plays down low, when he's parked down there, he's not getting a lot of touches. And, you can make the case, okay, like why not put him on one of the flanks? Maybe Gino on the other flank, just as a way to get the puck on Sidney Crosby's stick more often and get some more playmaking there, because you see him so much just kind of passing the puck around on the perimeter and it's not going anywhere. And then the bumper, I mean, for folks who don't know what the bumper spot is, they often kind of line up in almost like a diamond formation, and then they stick somebody, like whether it's Sid or Brian Russ, kind of in the middle of it all. That's the bumper spot right there in the slot. And they don't really have a good player for that. It's kind of a weird position. It's a shooting position at times, but it's also, a playmaking position when they're kind of pressured on the perimeter and they kind of force it into the middle to kind of relieve the pressure. Other teams, when they get the puck in the middle like that and the PK is stretched out, they can attack and make quick plays. And the Penguins just are really deliberate and don't get much accomplished when that happens. So I don't know, maybe Jake Gensel's a guy who can be in that role. And then you talk about the net front. I mean, Penguins fans love Patric Hornqvist and kind of the chaos agent that he was back in the day. He would just kind of park in front and like just kind of thrash around like a drunk dude in a mosh pit. And somehow it worked. It would like distract goalies. Both, you'd have multiple players down low who were trying to clear him out. And I know the Penguins in part moved on from him years ago. I mean, one, they kind of saw where things were trending with him and his age and kind of health concerns, but also they wanted to go for more of a movement-based power play. And he was like a big old anchor right in front of the net. But now they could really use a guy like that, particularly with a guy like Karlsson at the point who is willing to shoot from the point. So, in terms of a potential net front replacement, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, Andrew, but I don't really think they have a good option. I mean, Jeff Carter is big and has pretty good hands still, but, he's just too slow in terms of puck retrievals to kind of use him in that role in the top unit. I know Zohorna is like a tall gentleman, but he's not like, a big guy who's going to screen the goalie, and I don't think he's skilled enough to be on the top unit. And then, all their other options are just smaller guys. So, it's not all about size when it comes to screening the goalie. You can move through sight lines, but, you look at their personnel, and to me, it doesn't seem like they have like a tremendous option for the net front position either. So, I mean, that's just talking straight personnel. And then, we can get into their tactics and maybe their lack of innovation there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the next point I probably want to get to. But you bring up the net front point. I'm right there hand in hand with you. I mean, I look at the unit, I look at the roster, how it's been constructed. It's, the criticisms we see on social media, wherever it may be, about maybe this isn't the most physical unit or the one that has somebody who can, like a Hornqvist, who can park himself at the net front and be really a disturbing presence. That guy doesn't really exist on the roster. And my mind almost goes to the point of, again, this is too premature. We're a long ways until March for a trade deadline or anything like that. But if it needs to be, you got to go outside the organization to get a solution there. I don't know what that looks like or have a name that immediately comes to mind off the top of my head. That's just where my mind goes to, of maybe this isn't something that can be fixed, tomorrow, Tuesday against the Nashville or Thursday against Tampa, that we see real progress. If you don't have that guy, how can you expect the unit to take that next step forward if somebody who can really benefit it in that way doesn't exist on roster, right?
Well, there needs to be a willingness to use a player in that role as well. I mean, it's kind of a chicken and the egg deal, but, if they have that guy, are they going to want to use him that way? I mean, part of the reason they like Jake at the net front so much is he's able to pop off to the side of the net and make plays and kind of move around and do stuff. Like, if they get a guy who, okay, he's a bigger guy who is willing to stand in front and take a beating and do some of the stuff that Hornqvist did. I mean, will the Penguins want to use a guy in that regard? And I do think, like with Karlsson, one of the differences between he and Letang is just his willingness to shoot. And then he's just got a much more dangerous shot. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, you see him rip the one-timer that he ripped in their last game from the point at 5-on-5. With all due respect to Chris, he just doesn't have that kind of shot in his arsenal. So maybe with a guy like Karlsson at the point, they'd be more willing to do that shooting approach with a guy in front. But really, we haven't we haven't really seen an inclination for them to do anything differently. It's a lot of the same stuff with guys standing around and just trying to force seam passes through. And meanwhile, the PK is just kind of sitting there waiting for them to try it.
Right. You mentioned the seam passes there, and it's something that a lot of these guys keep saying, right? Is we're trying to pass it into the net. Mike Sullivan has said as much multiple times this season, and I know guys like Vensel have said it as well as others. Is there a concrete, obvious fix to you, given the personnel, given the way that this power play is structured and what they're trying to do? Is there anything that jumps out to you off the top of the head that, hey, this is a quick fix, this is something that could actually change it? Or is this just ingrained in these guys that because of them not being physical enough, because of the roles guys have at the bumper at the flank of the net front, that this is what it is? What jumps out to you as maybe something they could do to avoid those, from the cliches of the passing and into net, to keep coming up?
Well, I mean, I do think like a lot of it is just the mentality of these players. They're in their mid to late 30s. They've been doing it for a long time. And it's kind of hard to break those habits. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism about the coaching staff. Todd Reardon's the assistant coach, or associate coach, I should say, who runs it. But I think there's only so much they can do in terms of some of these individual decisions players are making. They're just kind of wired to try to do things a certain way. And I think the change they can make is just getting these guys out of their comfort zone. I mean, we've seen them try the motion. It worked a little bit early on, and then that kind of went away. But that's why I say, like, putting Sid in a different spot, maybe Gino in a different spot, and forcing them to stay there. Maybe that just gets them to look at things differently. I mean, I think if you had Sid in that right flank there, to the right of Carlson facing the net, he can take some one-timers, but that's not the big thing for him. It's just him being able to kind of, having two guys up top who can make plays, and he can look for these seam passes. I'd rather have him try it than Gino. And if you throw Gino over on the left flank, sure, you take away the one-timer threat from him, but what's he score on? 1, 2, maybe one-timers a year in the power play? It's not as big of a weapon as some fans might think, and certainly not like a Alex Ovechkin one-timer. So maybe if you put him on that left flank, he gets a chance to kind of loop high in the zone and get downhill and make plays, shooting on his strong side like that. Maybe it's just a different look, and maybe unlock some different stuff. But, I think just sticking with these guys in the same spot and just kind of thinking they're going to figure it out, I think that's kind of foolish. And I do think the coaching staff is going to be proactive about it at this point. If the struggles continue, they're going to start trying some different stuff. I think they're not just going to keep doing the same thing over and over.
Right. Final question before we move off this to some other special teams talk. Just given what you've seen at practice today, as well as the last week, certainly, an 0-for-18 stretch of the last 7 games. Is this something that you expect to? I mean, last week we're sitting here talking, and you said it best, right? Could we have expected it to get any worse? But is this a trend that you expect to continue, or is this a law of average things that, regardless of if there's not, overarching massive change, that something will fix here? How much worse do you think this gets before it gets better, I guess is the way of putting it?
I mean, I'll put it this way. There's like no signs that they're coming out of it anytime soon. I mean, just watching them today in practice, there was a lot of special teams work, and they still looked really bad, and they were frustrated. I mean, at one point, I thought Erik Karlsson was going to just tomahawk his stick over the boards of the glass and shatter it. I don't know, maybe he started thinking about how much that stick cost and didn't do it. But yeah, I mean, they're frustrated, and, it's not like their tactics have drastically changed. So, I do think eventually some things will change. They'll start to get some bounces. I mean, they have too much talent to be clicking at, what are they at, like 12.5% or something like that? I mean, it's going to come up. It's just a question, is it going to get to the point where they're like an average power play, or can they get to the point where it's, an elite type unit where it's making difference in games? Because we really only seen it impact one game 2 in Washington, scored a couple of power play goals. That was the difference in that game. Other than that, they've struggled. I mean, in just 16 of 20 games this year, they didn't get a single power play goal. That's just crazy. So I do think, it's inevitable that the results are going to improve. It's just a question of, is it going to improve enough? Is it going to be meaningful enough? And I don't know. We'll find out. 62 games left for them to get better.
Yeah. Right now, certainly far from an average group, 26th in the league at that 12.5% conversion clip, like you mentioned. But a special teams unit that certainly has been above average, at least in the last 10 games. has been that penalty kill. I don't have the number in front of me exactly, but I believe of the last 30 or the last 29, they've converted 27 of those, something like that. I think
27 out of 29. Yeah.
There you go.
Plus a couple shorthanded goals in there too. So really, it's a net of 0 goals, right? Or maybe they only had one shorty, but they've been good. That's the point.
Yeah, either way, they've been good. But what's changed? The first 10 games, there's a lot of moving parts, guys getting up to speed in the system. The last 10 games, maybe getting more comfortable, or is it a little bit deeper than that? What have you seen from the penalty kill that's allowed them to, for lack of better phrasing, kind of do a 180 here and become one of the better units in the league?
No, I think it's right. I think it's familiarity. I mean, we've seen in past years the same kind of deal. The PK under Mike Vellucci kind of starting slow. And it's aggressive scheme. I don't know that it's like completely unique in the NHL, but some teams do it differently, and you have new guys who come in who have to get used to playing that way. And also just with the aggressive style they play, you really need to have that kind of trust factor where all 4 guys are kind of on a string together. And that takes a little bit of a time. So I don't think they've changed much, if anything, in terms of the way they're playing. They're still getting pretty good pressure up ice. They're still aggressive inside the zone. I think it's just they had a lot of new faces like you do every year getting integrated. I think goaltending has been better, and that obviously is important when it comes to the PK to cover up their mistakes. And, I just think it's a more talented unit than it was last year when you factor in Brian Rust, who looks like he's going to play Tuesday in Nashville. He being a regular in the PK, Letang being a regular in the PK again, Pettersson making strides in that area. I just think they got a lot of talent, and they need a little bit of time to come together. But now that they have, I think they're pretty good. I know Mike Sullivan said today he still thinks there's room for improvement there. I don't know if that was just like a coach being a coach where he's always going to nitpick. I don't know what they could do to get better, but it's been pretty good. And I think it's kind of buoyed them a little bit with the fact that the power play has been so bad. At least the PK is getting the job done, that it's almost been close to even in terms of that kind of differential.
Has that at all been a surprise to you, just given we talk so often about this roster? It's one of the oldest ones in the NHL. A lot of guys coming in. It's not like they got younger per se over the offseason, right? But, you mentioned Rust, you mentioned Letang being these 2 guys who are important getting into the fold, who didn't have as much PK time last year. But has it been a surprise at all, just given the makeup of the roster, how effective it's been? Or is the backgrounds of these guys, the ones they brought in, like an Achari, like a Nieto, these guys who have made careers, I guess, for being PK guys, has that been something that you kind of expected this unit to kind of find its footing, how it has?
I mean, I would say what's surprising just that they came together so quickly. I mean, you're talking at 10 games for them to really kind of find their stride. I think that part is surprising just for the reasons we already talked about. The fact that they're already performing well. We'll see if they can sustain it. I mean, I don't think I looked at that personnel group heading into the year and thought, okay, this is going to be like a top 5 type PK. We'll see if they ultimately finish there. I think that would be surprising, but I at least thought they would be average. Riley Smith has killed penalties. Obviously, Achari is, billed as that kind of guy. That's been one area that he's been really noticeable, I think, all year is his work in the PK. So, it's just, I don't know if I thought that they would be this good this early or, if they would be elite. And we'll see if they can ultimately get to that point.
You mentioned Brian Rust, pivoting topics here. Him coming back to practice, of course, today, had been out, I believe it was the last 3 games with that injury. No line rushes today at practice, though, correct?
Correct.
Okay. With Brian Rust getting back into the fold here, we know when Mike Sullivan says game time decision, that usually means the guy's going to get back into the lineup.
He's playing. I'm predicting it.
Call it from the cheap seats. Brian Rust getting into the lineup. What would you expect for him to go back into that top line? I know they've had Drew O'Connor get some reps there. Stick him on the second line with Rickard Rakell being out. What would be your best guess shot from the cheap seats here for what they do with Rust getting back in the fold?
Well, I think there's 2 options, and then it's going to have a trickle-down effect on everyone else. Obviously Sid and Jake like playing with Brian Rust, and the 3 of their play together this year certainly justified keeping them together. They were, they've been far and away the team's best line. They've scored more than half of their even strength goals, which is pretty ridiculous. I don't know if that says more about them or the other lines. So you could certainly justify putting him on there, but I do think Drew's done okay on that line. He had a heck of a pass in their last game against Toronto to set up Jake. And my thought with that line is like, as long as the third guy isn't just like slowing them down, you can kind of get by. I mean, there were stretches where this is kind of a callback from a couple of years ago, but we saw like Dom Simone on that line, and no, it wasn't like a lasting solution, but he was able to play on that line for stretches. And even though he wasn't producing, the line as a whole was producing. So I kind of think maybe we could see Sullivan keep Drew there for a little bit and put Rust on the line with Malkin and Riley Smith to try to get them going. I mean, they were awesome in October. They've really struggled. And then Raquel came off the line, and even though he hadn't scored, that line got worse. I mean, I don't think Riley Smith has scored since the blowout in your hometown of San Jose. Gino, it's been like November 11th was the last time he scored with the goalie in net. So I do wonder if they'll put Rust on that line as a way to get Gino going. I don't think it's a long-term solution, but, trying to get that line up, get a little bit more balance. And then how does that affect Nylander, I think we're looking at either Alex Nylander or Jansen Harkins, getting booted off the roster when Rust comes back. I could see, if they're going to put, if they're going to keep Drew in the top six with Rust in there as well, I would say that probably means Nylander's gone because he's not a bottom six type, and maybe Harkins stays. So, I think there's more at play and just kind of thinking, okay, where do we put Rust? It's going to have a trickle-down effect on potentially 3 lines, the second power play unit, the PK. So it's a lot of factors for Sullivan to consider. I don't know. What's your prediction? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I was kind of, as you explained it out there, because I kind of had a hunch that was where you were going to go with the answer, with the second and third line, of course. The way that I would expect it, I mean, I haven't gotten to monitor it as closely as you with Nylander and with Harkins, how they've played since getting into the fold here. But if I had to guess, just based off what the opening night roster was and who's gotten the more opportunities, I feel like Nylander gets the boot and you keep Harkins here just because he's a better bottom six fit. But there's something to be said about the end of last season, 2022-23 season, giving Nylander that run there on the second line, that they liked what they saw from him there, and it's been a small sample size here. I just don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think that you probably stick with Harkins, keep seeing what you have with him, versus Nylander feels like a little bit more of a known commodity, and it's more about the scoring touch with him, with which if Russ is getting back into the fold and he can score goals from 2 feet away from the net, then maybe Nylander's value is a little bit less, right?
Yeah, I mean, to put it bluntly, I just don't. I don't know that Nylander is an NHL player. Yeah. He's kind of a tweener in the sense that he could produce in the AHL level. He has very good AHL skill, but he plays a finesse top 6 game, but doesn't necessarily have NHL top 6 talent. So he's just kind of, I think probably the team feels the same way about Valtteri Puustinen as another guy who, he can score in the AHL, but he either has to. He's got to play in the top 6 and maybe he's not skilled enough. So I don't know. We'll see how it works out. Not to say I've been, thoroughly impressed with Harkins either, but at least he's a different type player and is kind of a more sensible fit to play in a bottom 6 role.
Yeah, probably a speedier, more physical guy who slides in a little bit better there. Certainly just a challenge the Penguins have had to deal with here, with Raquel being injured, certainly being on long-term IR, and Russ being out as long as he has been.
And Poulin, let's Sam Poulin. Yeah. This was like really an opportunity missed for him because he's been hurt. And I don't know how close he is to returning, but this would have been a natural time for him to get called up, assuming his play warranted it, and see if he could stick. And just bad luck again for him that he's out and not able to kind of get this opportunity here.
Yeah, Poulin's still rehabbing with the team, believe, in Pittsburgh, of course, out week to week with that injury. So a guy who, like you said, bad timing on his end. One last topic for us to get into here before we wrap it up with some stick taps. Just briefly, goaltending. This is something that's been a sore spot for a lot of fans earlier in the season, of course. Tristan Jarry was somebody who was a little bit of a pinata for a stretch there. But just based on what we're seeing, what you've been writing earlier this week, feels like him as well as Alex Nedeljkovic and the brief stretch we had there with Magnus Hellberg. Safe to say the goaltending has maybe been a little bit better than expected, or what do you garner from what we've seen from the netminders, the 3 of them, I guess, and maybe more so Jarry, 20 games in here?
I think they've been pretty good. Not perfect. I know Jarry still had his maddening inconsistencies throughout this year, but the 2 backups have gotten the job done. Obviously the team has 5 shutouts in 20 games. That's not all goaltending. But still, it's something. So if you look at the team-wide goaltending totals through 20 games, the Penguins are in the top 6 in a lot of meaningful stats, including goal save above expected per game, save percentage, slot save percentage. So they're getting the goaltending they need over the kind of long haul here so far. And I think as it relates to Jari, I think you should feel encouraged. His numbers are getting better. Those peripheral numbers I just talked about. I think he's like up to maybe 12th in the league in goals saved above expected. So yeah, it looks like he's finding his stride and just like throwing away the fancy stats, just watching him play. He seems to be playing better as well. I mean, it's never going to be pretty with him. A lot of times it looks like he's battling the puck. He's not the most graceful guy, but he's making the saves. I think he's playing more confident, and his game has kind of leveled out a little bit too in terms of consistency. So, now that I've said that, he's going to play in Nashville and score in his own net from the face-off circle and do a bunch of crazy stuff, and they're going to lose like 6-3. It just seems like anytime you expect Tristan to kind of, get it going, that's what happens. But I do think he's trending in the right direction. If you just look at even the last 2-3 weeks, I think there's maybe like one game in there where he was a problem. But the rest of the games, he did everything he needed to win,
Yeah, done what he needed to do. And that's especially coming in with that stretch kind of getting interrupted with the injury that maybe could have easily sidetracked some guys. But for Jari has been able to kind of continue it through that and play to that. As you've coined it, the fall of play that Jari has, it always seems to have a good stretch each season. He's started to maybe produce one of those here, but something to keep continuing to have tabs on for sure.
The man loves his pumpkin spice lattes. They get him fired up.
Is that your go-to order at Starbucks this time of year?
No. I don't. No. Pike Place. I get the same thing. A nice strong cup of coffee with a little bit of cream. Nothing fancy.
Yeah, black coffee with a little splash. That's all you need. I'm right there with you. Okay, no coffee talk. We'll back to stick taps. We'll wrap it up here. Matt, puck's in your corner. Who are you giving out stick taps to this week?
I'm going to give it to Noel Acciari, your guy. 2 weeks in a row for Noel, right? I mean,
yeah.
He was very good in the Toronto game. I think it's fair to say that at least at 5-on-5, he hasn't been as impactful as anticipated. I mean, I think his line has done pretty well in terms of goal prevention, but he was kind of billed as this energy guy that was hitting people and blocking shots, and I think he just kind of blended in the background a lot initially, but that's changed in recent games. And, Mike Sullivan thought his game against Toronto was his best of the season. And I would agree. I mean, not only did he, have that great individual effort to pick off that pass and score, but he had a screen on Carlson's goal. I think he blocked 3 shots, a couple hits, good work on the PK. And then I think the key thing from that game was down the stretch, Sullivan didn't play the Malkin line, and he really didn't play the third line either. He relied on the Crosby line and Acciari to close out that game. They were rotating shifts, and Acciari got the job done. So, just one game. We'll see if you can build on it. But that game right there kind of was like, okay, this is what, set the goal aside. Like, this is what this guy was built as. And maybe now that he's a couple months into being with a new team and a new scheme, that he's finding his way, and we're going to see more of that. We'll see.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about that with the skill, because I remember Crosby, I think, in what the story you wrote, had a quote about that being a skilled goal or something like that. But how all these
he was just agreeing with, he was being a nice Canadian man. I was like, oh, that was a pretty goal, and he was like, yes, it was pretty. He's like, is that the quote you're looking for? Okay, good.
Well, I'm in agreement with you. It was definitely a pretty goal, so I'm glad all three of us can agree on something. But it was just funny to me because anybody I talked to was like, oh, just give it time. Like, he's a skilled guy. He's got it. He can pull one or two out of his bag. And I was like, well, I haven't seen it through the first 16, 17 games, but that element of Acciari's game we've certainly seen here recently. We'll see if it sticks. I'll give mine out to John Ludwig for stick taps. Got him back in the lineup, coming back from that concussion. That was certainly a scary moment that you and I saw there. I believe that was in the Dallas game. So for him getting back into the fold after those couple of games in Wilkes, getting back into the starting lineup on that third pair with Ryan Shea, not to mention being in the lineup, but playing on his offside on that right-hand side, the left shot defenseman Ludwig is. Stick taps to him for getting in the lineup, especially because, with the Penguins having Chad Ruedel and having POJ out, which maybe that's a good thing, just given the way that they were playing this year. But they needed Ludwig to be healthy, need him to be back, and is back in the lineup. So stick taps to John Ludwig as I continue to give out stick taps to third pair defensemen. I think that's my trend so far this year.
All right, so this podcast is wrapping up here in Nashville. What's the plan? What a difficult life you have. You get to go out to California to spend a week from your family, and you come right back and you get two of the top road cities, Nashville and Tampa. I mean, those are like top 5 for me. So what's the plan in Nashville?
Yeah, plan tonight. So we're recording this. I'm wrapping up around 5:30. Gonna get out there. We'll figure out where. I gotta look into that. So if you have any recommendations you'd like to share in the podcast,
who's we? Like no one thinks you're going out with anyone, but anyway, who's we?
Me would be solo. That's you guessed correctly.
Well, you might see some members of the organization at Tootsie's. That would be maybe where you want to end up later in the evening.
Tootsie's. Is that like when we say later in the evening, is that 9:30 or is that like 11:30 later in the evening?
Well, it wouldn't be too late because it's they got a game tomorrow.
Yeah.
Now, if it was an off day or a practice day, you might get into the AM. But
noted.
Yeah.
I do have to do my usual my look into the local culinary, see where I'm going to get it. First time in Nashville, so I got to figure out where I'm going to get a chicken sandwich. I got to be a tourist. So any recs there will be gladly taken as well.
I mean, the recommendation would be like, don't get the hot. Take the mild option.
Okay.
Unless you're like one of those lunatics who likes to eat habanero peppers. Like I like buffalo stuff, but I mean, for the draft, I went to a place and I got a hot chicken sandwich, and like I was like literally just drooling. It was disgusting. It was so hot. There was nothing I could do about it. So I wouldn't go that far. That would be my only recommendation: is don't get too much spice.
I'm the same with you. I like spice, like I can handle it, but at some point you're like, are you challenging yourself just to say that you're strong and can take spice, or are you actually enjoying what you're eating? Like there's a fine line to balance there, right? So, but yeah, we'll see. We got it's 5:30, so I got some time, but I have to.
All right, go out there and get after it. Let's get you out the door right now.
All right, I'm out of here. That's all. Thanks, guys, for checking in for our weekly chat. We'll be back next week. For Matt Vensel, I'm Andrew Destin, signing off here in Nashville, and I will catch you guys, or we will all catch you guys soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.